Hello once again, everyone, and this is actually a video that I've been looking forward to making for probably about a year. I want to talk about English longsword. Now, let me preface this. This is specifically building off of something. So I didn't do any of the interpretation work on what I'm about to go over. We are covering the Man That Will, a part of the Harleian manuscript from the 15th century. It's just a series of 8 anonymous longsword devices, and then the play between the two bucklers, which I have not touched yet. But all of what I'm about to go over is working through it with the assistance of Wyatt from Winnipeg Historical Fencing Club. I think their name might be different now. I don't know if it's the school name has changed, but regardless, you can find all the in-depth interpretation on his YouTube channel, The Hawk of Winnipeg. That's H-A-U-K-E. So he goes into depth about his way of interpreting it and all the pieces, etc. I will kind of briefly go over some of that, but really, I'm working off of what he did. Now, there are going to be parts where I disagree, not in regards to, well, sometimes in regards to order of interpretation, but this isn't meant to be a rebuttal. This is meant to be, I've done longsword for a really long time. I have certain ways of doing things. Let me see how, using his interpretation of the words, we can make this work. So that's what I did as far as taking my students through it, and the video that I will probably follow this up with, where I showcase these plays against a person, I'll also show why I did that. Spoiler, it involves axes. But again, the little bits where interpretation differs are going to be execution into certain cuts, or just the order in which I like to use these devices. So, as far as the devices themselves, like I said, there's 8 lessons, and they're assaulty style, meaning the defense of the opponent is just implied. It's never exclusively even said that you're striking at someone other than target level. The main pieces that we're going to be using, I will briefly go over again. If you want more detail, please go check out Wyatt's channel. He's really done a lot of great work. So, first off, hawks. Pretty simple. It's your over, it's your fendenti, just out, or alternatively, out. And it could also be a through cut, or it could be from the shoulder, out. That's your hawk. Really nothing to write home about. Half hawks. That's the idea of, rather than me coming all the way back to launch another hawk or doing a quarter blow, I instead use the lever to then fire from essentially the halfway mark. A very good follow-up, essentially. Quarter blows, as I just mentioned, is when I load, aim, fire, and there can be multiple quarters. We'll see that in the first play. That's essentially all of your ways of cutting straight forward with a hawk. Then we get into roundies. This is where I have a difference in the way I like to execute them. So, you can interpret roundies as, essentially you could insert a Zwerkow in there. If you're familiar with the KDF system, you can put a Zwerkow in there and it serves the same purpose. I don't want to do Zwerkows as part of this. It doesn't mention thumb grip, doesn't mention hand grip, right? I don't want to do them. I like to treat my roundies as something different, which is I'm using them essentially as the high mittel. However, there is a little more to them, and I'll go over that in detail when I do it against another person. But essentially, the way I will execute my roundies is I'm going to cut about neck level, sometimes a little lower, but with a wide step out, so I'm behind that tip. Then the thing that makes them fast is that following either a hawk or an initial roundie, I'm going to use tight turnover with the lever to ensure that I'm pushing far with that nice good momentum. So here's that again. I'll do an initial hawk. Now my roundie would be, again, not quite horizontal, wider than a 45, pushing forward. That's my roundie. And so if I want to run roundies, it would just be striking out, striking out, striking out. Nice, wide, driving sorts of cuts. You could still execute this with Zwerk, like I said, and if somehow we find a new bit of evidence that says, yes, put your thumb on the blade, that's fine. That's not how I will be doing them. So, those are my roundies. Then we have rakes. Rakes are just meant to be that. It's up. That could be short edge, that could be true edge, doesn't necessarily really matter. Then the only other thing we have is the snatch, which I'll show in the first play. So those are our pieces. Like I said, if you want more detail, please go check out Wyatt's channel. But if I refer to them by this language, now you essentially have a guide. So play number 1. This is going to be, I fire out a hawk. From here, I'm going to roundie outward. So just as another breakdown, outward is to my left, homeward or inward is to my right. So, I fire my initial hawk, then I'm going to build off of it with a roundy and a step outward. Boom, fire at that side of their head, they defend against it. I'm going to step homeward, fire with a roundy back. So, 1, 2, 3. Next, I'm going to make them believe I'll throw another roundy, because why stop at 1? So I lift, but instead I move through a quarter blow, up through, and from here you could step or not step. I'll explain my reasoning in a second. And then I'm going to go into the snatch down at the leg. So a quarter blow smitten with a snatch, I let go, and that's the snatch. A single-handed, long-reaching cut, usually at the level of the leg, sometimes delivered a little bit higher. So all in all, we have engagement, working around the blade, working back around the blade, feint, change of target, withdraw. Here's that against the air one more time, and this time I'll go this way, and then I'll explain some reasoning of mine. So, hawk, roundy out, roundy back, quarter blow, snatch, got it. So now why do I do things this particular way? The hawk's relatively self-explanatory. Roundy out and roundy back is pretty self-explanatory too. It's get them to engage with you, they're on the defensive. Roundy out's nice and simple, targets that right side of their head. If they defend with anything other than close arms, I'm going to hit them. Roundy back is, rather than continuing to work that side as we will later, it gets me back to a place of safety. In particular, you would also have opportunities for thrusts or things along those lines. Pretty much I've just centralized their guard. Now for the quarter rake here, you can do it in one of two ways. You can either pivot over and step with your cut, which is completely fine. If they're falling back away from me, so I'm making it look like I'm about to do another roundy and they fall away, I'll step forward. But what that means is then when I do my snatch with a retreat, I will end up right leg forward again. That's not the end of the world, I can still do a hawk in place or things along those lines. However, for sake of my own personal repetitions, I don't need to step on that cut. If I've gotten close enough with my initial hawk, roundy out, and I can hit them with roundy back, I'm plenty close enough to take their hands without stepping, which means that I will then be left leg forward when I finish, ready to launch into something else. And that's where we start to get into one of those rules I mentioned. I do things a certain way because of the way I've been doing longsword for so many years. I want to reload my right leg, and I will only ever enter from my right. Fence not from left if right of hand. That's a golden rule for me, and I'm going to keep using it unless implicitly told to do otherwise. So my preference ends up with me stepping back. So I'll show it one more time this way, and then we'll move on to play number 2. So, hawk, roundy out, roundy back, quarter, snatch, done. Nice and loaded. Now, play number 2. It's going to build off play number 1, where we're essentially just going to drive someone up tight, and then we're going to take their elbows. This is a pretty simple one, but what seems simple on the surface has actually been very, very fun to apply. And you'll see this a lot more when I do the follow-up video to this, where I'll do all these against a person, and I'll show why I like to do some of these things. Spoiler, involves axes. But basically, that breaks down to, and I'll face the camera for this, hawk from the right, turn over, hawk from the left. From now I have set my distance, and I've got my opponent to engage relatively narrow. Now half hawk from the right, so I push, angle, hawk. And what this needs to be, half hawk in particular, I really need to make this a hard expulsion. These can't be gentle cuts waiting for the next thing, and they're not to be treated like roundies. I want to shear through my opponent's blade to make it so they can't parry like this. They have to start lifting that guard if they don't want my tip getting at them. So again, hawk, hawk, half hawk, half hawk. Now here's where interpretation differs. When Wyatt does it because he wants to finish, because basically what we need to do is to make this complete, we need to then do 2 roundies in the manner before at the elbows. So we have to do the roundies the same as the play before us, meaning roundy out, roundy back. You can make this happen by doing your first cut from the left, and you will always cut left, right, left, right, left, right. That's fine. I don't like doing that because I have to initiate with a left cut, and it didn't tell me I had to. So this is where I'm going to do a slightly different bit of footwork. So, half hawk 1, half hawk 2. And you may not even necessarily need to be left foot forward for this. I'm just stepping for sake of. But next, rather than them expecting me to go the other side, as I've shown that I will do, driving them higher and higher, I haul my pommel out to the side and do a roundy, stepping across to take those elbows. Now I roundy back in the same manner, take the elbow on the other side, and also guard my head. So this ends up as hawk from right, hawk from left, half hawk from right, half hawk from left, roundy right. A good little mix-up if you're going to be hounding somebody, and it drives them higher and higher, so their elbows are mine. So, one more time at the front, then I'll show it from the side. Hawk, hawk, half hawk, half hawk, roundy out, roundy back. Nice and guarded. Now I'll show it going this way. Hawk, hawk, half hawk, roundy out, roundy back. This can also be very good if they're starting to, rather than lifting their guard up like this, if they try to start guarding like this, you can really take that snappy little cut at their elbows very, very easily. So if they manage to defend your first crazy roundy, they will not escape your second. One more this way, then we'll get to play 3. And I should also note, speaking of this, you don't have to move your feet on some of these half hawks. If you've got good lever cutting mechanics, you can absolutely blow through a narrow guard without much difficulty. It's just good to step on all your cuts. So for this one, I will purposely not step on one of my half hawks, which will set up my roundy in a slightly different way. So, hawk, hawk, half hawk, roundy out, roundy back. Doesn't change things too much, just means that I have a slightly different step. And that's another thing that I will do, which is fight off of my lead foot. I'm very comfortable doing that and doing secondary oblique steps, or later we'll even get into the cock step. But that's for later. So that's play 2. What about play 3? Play 3 is where things get fun. Play 3 is roundy central. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a hawk initially. I'm going to get them to defend against it. I'm going to, oh sorry, I'm skipping a step. I'm going to do a spring upward, then cut a hawk, then I'm going to roundy out, roundy back, then roundy, roundy, roundy. So what this leads into is, my spring upward is I start in a low guard on the left side. I'm going to extend a one-handed thrust as I pass forward. Boom. Nice and far reaching to get them to have to try and break my tip down. The idea here being that when I extend this thrust, if you try to parry it from the side, you're just leading into worse and worse cuts. Your best option is to try and break the thrust downward, as we see in many different actions, right? Overbinding is always the safest way to deal with a point. So, I find my thrust, you overbind it, I turn it, grab it, hawk. Because I'm so far away, I have plenty of time to execute this pretty well. The spring upward is just nice and light. Boom, turn, cut. Now following that hawk, I find my opponent may bind in one of 2 ways, and this is where practicality versus what the text says can happen. Depending upon how they broke your sword. If they broke it downward, you'll be able to hawk from your right without difficulty. They'll basically have to parry like this. If they broke it across, you'll have to do more of a left hawk. They may instead parry like this, which can lead then you don't have to do the first of the 2 roundies, that being the roundy out. You can skip into just one and then start running rings on them. But for our purposes, we'll live in a perfect world. So, spring upward, hawk, and they parried the way I wanted. Roundy out, roundy back, we've done that before. Roundy out, roundy back. Now I will run rounds on them. So I'm going to roundy out, right leg with this one, roundy forward. And this one in particular, really make sure the tip moves first. Around, step behind it with that right leg. I want to bind tight, so they have to push my sword up. Now this step is going to be a full-on triangle. I'm going to roundy so that I am facing them at the end, cutting toward trying to get between the ears. It's a very similar use of the zwerkau in this manner, where the exact text says to strike him between the ears so he looks foolish. You're trying to work around somebody. Not a very difficult thing to achieve. However, what you need to pay attention to when you do this step is left step out, right cross step, but I'm not crossing my feet. You can, but in particular, since I'm not using a thumb grip, I'll keep it a little more narrow. Basically, my heel is lined up with kind of the nub of my big toe. Then triangle step to ensure that all of my core is going inward, so I blow through that last parry without needing to spring off my foot. If we cared less about striking our opponents in the back of the head, because again, I fence in the 21st century, I can't afford to strike my opponents in the back of the head, people won't play with me anymore. Then instead, I could absolutely, after rounding out, rounding back, 1, load that step, spring off of it, and now I'm ending up basically facing sideways. That's a different topic that I think I've discussed in Messer. For my purposes though, since I'm trying not to go all the way around them, I will just do the following steps that I already showed. So here's that again. Spring upward, hawk, roundy out, roundy back, roundy, roundy, roundy. Done. Now I'll do it facing this way. Spring upward, hawk, roundy out, roundy back, roundy 1, roundy 2, roundy 3. Nice and straightforward. Really nothing too complicated. So, that's like I said, the first 3. We'll save 4 for another time, but I'll come back to this with doing it with another person, and I'll tackle the other couple plays. Maybe I'll do 4, 5, 6, all back to back, because 6 is really small. But the essential idea behind this is just, this is the way I like to do what was presented toward me. If you want more detail on the interpretation itself, like I said, go check out the Hawk of Winnipeg. He's done a lot of great work. I certainly can't read Old English, or I suppose that's more like Middle English. And if you want to have a go at reading the text yourself, it's on Wiktenauer. Just look up English Longsword on Wiktenauer, it'll pop right up. But either way though, thank you very, very much for watching, and we'll go over some other techniques another time.